Hello and welcome to tonight's journey. Before we leave the present world behind, let me know. Where are you listening from and what time is it where you are right now? Perhaps outside the night has already grown quiet, the city has softened, or there is only a small light glowing beside you. Let this sound drift more slowly with your breathing, and let your imagination open like a doorway into an age incredibly far away. Now picture the frame gently lifting away from your room. It rises above the rooftops, passes over streets, glowing with lights, climbs beyond the sea of clouds, and then continues moving backward through time. Cities fade away, fields recede into darkness. The footprints of humankind gradually vanish from the earth. The clock of the planet turns back through millions upon millions of years until the world below no longer resembles any place we have ever known. We are now about 160 million years in the past. Below us lies an ancient forest veiled in moisture. The trunks of seed-bearing trees rise into a thin mist. Ferns spread in deep green layers across the damp ground. Far in the distance, enormous dinosaurs move slowly and heavily like living mountains, passing through the first morning of the Jurassic world. But tonight's story does not begin with the largest creatures. It begins lower down, in a quieter place among slender branches and the shadowed spaces beneath the forest canopy. There a small creature stirs. There are still teeth in its jaws. There are still claws at the ends of its forelimbs. Behind it, a long tail helps it keep balance as it climbs across damp branches. But on that small body, something very strange is beginning to appear, soft, thin, delicate feathers trembling faintly in the ancient air. This is not yet a bird, as we know birds today, nor is it a master of the sky. This creature stands in a very special in-between place, between the ground and the air, between fleeing and taking flight, between the survival instincts of a dinosaur and the future of wings. In this story, we will not search for a single magical moment when dinosaurs suddenly learn to fly. Instead, we will follow a slower, deeper, and far stranger journey, the journey of feathers, of lighter bones, of forelimbs gradually changing, of short leaps among the trees, and of fragile fossils that still preserve the earliest traces of flight. So let your body relax. Let the present world drift a little farther away, and come with me into an age when the sky did not yet belong to birds, but in the shadows of ancient forests, the first wings had already begun learning how to touch the air. Imagine that you are standing perfectly still in an ancient morning so distant that every clock ever made by human hands has lost all meaning. There is no sound of cars passing along the street, no rooftops, no city lights, no human voices calling to one another at the break of day. Before you lies a different Earth, a planet still familiar in its stone water clouds and light, yet so strange that it feels almost like an ancient dream. We are returning to roughly 160 million years ago, when the world was still deep within the Jurassic period, and the sky did not yet belong to the birds as we know them today. The morning air is heavy with moisture. Mist hangs low among the tall trunks, making the forest before you seem as though it is breathing very slowly. The sunlight does not blaze at once, but slips through layer after layer of canopy, breaking into pale golden streaks across the ground covered in ferns. Beneath your feet, the earth is soft and wet, with thin layers of mud still marked by the footprints of creatures that pass through during the night. A few drops of water remain on the leaves, sliding downward very slowly, then disappearing into the moss and the roots woven together like dark threads. This is not a forest like a modern rainforest. You will not see vast open grasslands because grass has not yet spread across the world the way it will much later. You will not see familiar flowers trembling in the wind either, because flowering plants have not yet become a common beauty of the land. Instead, there are ferns, seed-bearing trees, cycads, ancient conifers, tall, straight trunks and leaves that are harder, rougher, carrying a quiet and ancient kind of beauty. This world is green, but it is a different green, deeper, damper, darker, as though the entire forest is being held inside the very old memory of the planet. If you look up at the sky, the spaces between the canopies are not entirely still. There are creatures gliding overhead, but they are not birds. They are flying reptiles with membranous wings stretched from the body to elongated fingers moving through the air like thin shadows of the Jurassic. They knew how to use the wind before birds appeared in the familiar forms we recognize today. The sky at this moment is not empty, but it still has no morning birdsong, no sparrows hopping along branches, no swallows slicing across the evening light. The feeling is strange, a sky filled with motion, yet missing the sounds we now think of as natural. Below in the forest and across the open ground near the water, great dinosaurs are moving through their world. From far away, the earth may tremble faintly beneath the footsteps of enormous herbivores. They move slowly, but every motion carries the weight of a body built for an age very different from our own. Long necks rise among the treetops. Tails sweep through low ferns. When a tree trunk is pulled aside, leaves fall like green rain, and the whole forest shivers softly. These creatures do not know that they will one day become symbols of a lost world. They are simply living, eating, moving, searching for water, avoiding danger, and continuing a rhythm of life that has existed for millions upon millions of years. But the Jurassic does not belong only to the giants. If our story looks only at the largest shadows, we will miss the most important place of all. Beneath the lower layers of the forest, among rotting fallen trunks and dark crevices thick with moisture, a smaller world is also moving. Insects crawl across bark. Small, quick creatures vanish into the leaf litter. Lizards, tiny mammals, and countless other quiet forms of life press into spaces that the great dinosaurs can never reach. It is here, in the low, narrow, easily overlooked places of the forest, that history often begins with very small changes. Let us move a little more slowly. Let the frame lower itself closer to the ground. Here, everything feels nearer, but also more dangerous. A broken branch may be the hiding place of a small predator. A trembling patch of leaves may be the sign of prey trying to escape. The smell of mud, rotting wood, and stagnant water in shallow pools creates a world thick with sensation. There is no clear path. There is no space that is completely safe. Every creature must read the forest with its eyes, with its ears, with the vibrations beneath its feet, and with instincts sharpened across countless generations. At the edge of a shallow body of water, the light opens wider. The surface of the lake is not completely still, but ripples gently with the wind and with the movements of small creatures beneath. Insects skim low over the water. Some animal has just rushed through the mud, leaving behind a long streak like a brushstroke. Farther away, where the forest begins to thin, herds of plant-eating dinosaurs can be seen moving together, feeding, while keeping distance from the shapes of predators. Life here is not noisy in the way the modern world is noisy, but it is never silent. It is a low, deep music made from leaves rubbing together, moving water, cracking branches, heavy footsteps, and strange calls that vanished from the earth long ago. If you could stand there long enough, you would realize something: the ancient world was not a chaotic stage made only of fangs and pursuit. it also had moments of peace. A small creature lies motionless on a sun-warmed trunk. Young animals press close to a larger body. A soft rain passes through, darkening the whole forest, then awakening the smell of wet earth. After the raindrops of water clinging to the ferns shine under the sun like thousands of tiny shards of glass. Life is in no hurry to explain itself. It simply exists quietly, patiently, and gradually changes. The earth itself was changing then as well, even though no creature in the forest could sense the full scale of that process. The continents were not standing still. They drifted very slowly, separating, shifting, opening the way for new seas, new mountains, new climates. Vast lands connected or divided, creating different environments where life could try many different paths. In one place there was damp forest. Elsewhere, drier regions, coastlines, lake plains, or isolated islands. Each region was like a separate room of evolution, where living bodies learned to adapt to the small rules of their own environment. In that world size was an advantage, but not the only one. Giant creatures could reach the high branches and make enemies hesitate by the weight of their presence alone. But smaller bodies had other paths. They slipped through narrow gaps, climbed low branches, changed direction quickly, and disappeared into shadow before being seen. They lived along the borders of the forest, where the ground met the tree trunks, where roots lifted out of the mud, where tiny spaces became shelters. The history of life does not always begin with a great roar. Sometimes it begins with a very light movement in the undergrowth. Look more closely at the small dinosaurs running through those lower layers. Not all dinosaurs were giants. Many species had compact bodies, flexible hind legs, quick-turning heads, and eyes that were always watching. They may have hunted insects, small lizards' eggs, or even smaller prey. Some lived close to the ground. Some may have climbed onto low branches. Some used their tails to keep balance while changing direction. At this stage, they are not yet modern birds. But in their quick movements, in their flexible necks, in forelimbs that are no longer merely crude tools, the viewer today may sense something faint and uncertain. Some future is being prepared. Even so, we must move very slowly and very carefully. We should not look into this forest and rush to say that birds have already fully appeared. The truth is far more subtle. 160 million years ago is an important point in time, but not a moment when everything had already been completed. The world is holding the pieces, the conditions, the bodies, and the behaviors that may one day lead to a great transformation. Here, the story is not yet the story of flocks of birds flying in a V across the sky. This is a deeper opening where the stage of nature has been set, but the main character is still stepping out from the shadows. What is astonishing is that even at this time, the sky was already a space full of temptation. From the ground below, the bright openings between the trees looked like doors left ajar. Above, there could be shelter. There could be insects. There could be eggs. There could be branches that offered refuge from larger predators. But the distance between the ground and the trees was not simple. A wrong leap could send a body crashing down to the forest floor. A slow climb could turn a small creature into prey, and so any trait that helped with better balance, stronger grip, a slower fall, or more flexible changes in direction could make the difference between life and death. Picture one very brief moment. Beneath the shadow of the canopy, a small creature is startled by a sound behind it. Its body springs upward, its two legs pushing off from the ground, its forelimbs spreading to keep balance as it launches over a large root. That movement is not yet flight. There is no open sky, no powerful wings beating through the air. But within that small leap, we can sense a path quietly beginning to form. Not a sudden miracle, but a chain of tiny advantages tested again and again in everyday life. The Jurassic, then, was not only an age of enormous bodies, it was also an age of unnamed possibilities. In a forest like this, nature does not work through grand declarations. Nature does not say that one day the descendants of dinosaurs will cross oceans, perch on rooftops, sing in the morning, or guide human imagination toward the idea of freedom. Nature only preserves bodies that are slightly better suited behaviors, that are slightly more effective structures, that help a creature survive a little longer. Given enough time, such small things can become a revolution. As the day rises higher, the forest grows more alive. Mist thins among the treetops, revealing layers of leaves stacked upon one another. The sunlight lifts moisture from the ground, creating a faint haze close to the mud. Great dinosaurs continue moving through the open woodland, leaving behind the scent of crushed plants and deep footprints. A predator passes through a zone of shadow. Body low eyes, bright footsteps controlled. Somewhere above, a flying reptile glides past and disappears behind the trees. Everything is happening according to its own rhythm, unaware that millions of years later, humans will try to read this world through fossilized bones, footprints, layers of rock, and the delicate impressions left behind. That is also what makes this scene feel both vast and fragile. No voice from the Jurassic reaches us today in its original form. No forest from 160 million years ago still stands before us exactly as it once was. What remains is often only fragments, a fossilized bone, a footprint in sediment, a faint outline on a slab of stone, a tiny structure that scientists must patiently decode. But from those fragments, a picture slowly begins to appear. Not a perfect picture, but a doorway wide enough for imagination to enter, as long as that imagination continues to walk beside caution. And when afternoon begins to fall over the ancient forest, the light turns a deeper gold. Long shadows stretch across the ground. The louder movements grow fewer, giving way to smaller motions and movements in the undergrowth. A tiny creature quietly climbs onto a low branch, pauses, and watches the darkness below. Its body is light, its eyes alert, its claws gripping the damp bark. From that position, the ground seems farther away, and the air around it seems to have a clearer shape. Nothing has truly taken flight in this moment. But the feeling of height, of distance, to fall, of balance between tree trunk and forest floor has already become part of life. At the end of the day, the Jurassic sinks into a very slow twilight. There is no birdsong calling flocks back to their nests. No dark wings cutting across the sky as in modern evenings. Instead, there are insects, water leaves, and the strange sounds of a world that has vanished. Yet that very absence makes the story stronger. Because when the sky has not yet filled with birds, every small sign pointing toward flight becomes more noticeable. A forelimb spreads to keep balance. A small body searches for a way upward. A creature lives between the ground and the trees. All of it feels like very quiet notes before the great music begins. Night falls. Moisture thickens again among the trunks. The great dinosaurs are now only distant shadows, while the lower forest still moves in silence. The Earth of 160 million years ago does not know that it is holding within itself one of the most beautiful stories in the history of life. Not a story of immediate domination, but a story of preparation, experimentation, and waiting. Before the first wings could truly find lift, a world like this had to exist. Forests, branches, predators, prey, moisture, darkness, spaces between leaves, and countless small moments when living bodies had to choose how to move in order to survive. So, as we leave the first chapter of this journey, hold on to that image, an ancient earth that was not silent, yet still lacked the sound of birds. A sky that already had flying creatures, but not yet the wings we know so well. A forest where small dinosaurs were living between the limits of the ground and the mysterious pull from above. Everything is still at the beginning. The story has not yet entered the feathers, the famous fossils, or the theories of how flight came to be. But the stage is ready. In the midst of the Jurassic before birds ruled the sky, the world had already begun to create the first conditions for a rise that would be very light, very slow, and very wondrous. After standing in the ancient forest of 160 million years ago, after hearing the damp breath of the Jurassic, and seeing a sky without the familiar sound of birds, we now lower our gaze and look more closely. No longer just at the vast landscape, no longer only at the seed-bearing trees rising through the mist, or the shadows of enormous dinosaurs passing through the forest like hills that know how to move. This chapter begins with something far smaller, so small that with only a passing glance we might miss it. A fine strand upon the skin, a soft covering along the neck, a faint trace of feather trembling in the humid wind. And from those seemingly humble details, one of the most beautiful transformations in the history of life begins to appear. In the familiar imagination of many people, dinosaurs often have dry skin, hard scales, heavy bodies, and the appearance of giant reptiles. That image is not entirely wrong for many species, but it is no longer enough to tell the whole story. The ancient world was richer than that. Alongside bodies covered in scales, there were smaller groups of dinosaurs carrying feather-like structures on their bodies, from simple filaments to more complex forms. They were not necessarily wings. They had not yet turned their owners into true flying creatures. But they changed the way we look at dinosaurs, not only as cold reptilian beings from an old imagination, but as living bodies that could be warm, quick, flexible, and sometimes unexpectedly soft. Imagine an early morning in a Jurassic forest. The mist still rests upon the lower layers of leaves. A small creature steps out from the shadow beneath a tree root. Its body is not large. Its hind legs are light and firm, its neck flexible, its eyes constantly watching. As the creature passes through a pale streak of light, you notice that the surface of its body is not merely smooth or scaled in the way we often imagine. Along its back and neck are fine strands, almost like a layer of ancient silk. They do not spread into wings. They are not enough to lift the body from the ground. But when a soft wind moves through them, that covering trembles, making the creature's shape look entirely different from the bare dinosaurs of old illustrations. The important thing to understand is that feathers did not necessarily arise for flight. In nature, many traits first appear for one reason, then later become useful for another. A light covering over the body could help retain warmth in the cold of morning. A striking display of feathers could help attract a mate or signal a warning to rivals. Colors that blended into the forest could help a small creature escape the eyes of a predator. A covering around a young body could offer protection shelter or hold warmth close to the skin. Before becoming a symbol of the sky, feathers may well have begun as a solution of the ground. Let us slow down at this idea, because this is where the story becomes deeper. We often look at modern birds and immediately think of flight. We see feathers and think of wings. We see wings and think of the sky. But evolution does not work backward from the final result, designing everything from the beginning with that end in mind. In the ancient forest, a feathered creature did not need to fly in order to benefit from feathers. If the feather covering helped the body stay warmer, that creature could become active earlier in the morning. If its coloration helped it hide better, its chances of survival would rise. If bands or displays of feathers helped individuals recognize one another during the breeding season, they could become part of social and reproductive life. All of these small advantages repeated across many generations could preserve a trait within an evolutionary line, even when the sky was still very far away. Look more closely at the skin of these creatures. Scales and feathers are both structures that develop from the skin, but a feather is not simply a scale that suddenly stretched itself longer. The story is more delicate than that. Living tissues in the skin, through tiny changes in the development of the body, can create different kinds of growth. At first, a simple filament, then branching forms, and gradually structures with a shaft, smaller branches, and a broader surface. Not every ancient feather form looked like the feathers of modern birds. Some were like threads, some resembled down, some formed tufts. Others would only later become complex enough to relate to aerodynamics. But in the beginning, the beauty of feathers did not lie in flight, but in their ability to open new possibilities for the body. In a damp forest, a soft covering could mean the difference between a body that loses heat quickly and a body that holds its energy longer. Small dinosaurs did not have the advantage of enormous size. A smaller body means heat can escape more easily. If a creature needed to move, hunt, flee, or care for its young in the cool conditions of early morning, keeping warm could be very important. When we look at a thin layer of feathers along the neck or back, we should not rush to imagine wings. First, imagine warmth held close to the skin like a very light garment that evolution is testing on smaller bodies. But feathers could do more than keep warmth. Feathers could also speak through images. In a world without human language, the body itself becomes the signal. A raised tuft of feathers could make a creature appear larger. A patch of bright color could attract the attention of a mate. A pattern of light and dark could help members of the same species recognize one another within the tangled forest layers. Picture a small dinosaur standing on a fallen tree trunk, the light passing over its back and turning its fine feathers into a soft outline. Another creature sees it from a distance. In that moment, feathers are not tools of flight. Feathers are living signals, a way for the body to say, I am here, I am strong, I belong to this species, I am warning you, or I am searching. In dense forests, color and shape could also become a silent layer of protection. A body covered in brown, gray, black, or streaks of light and dark could blend into bark, damp earth, leaf litter, and shadow. When a predator passes nearby, the small creature may need only to remain still for a few seconds. Feathers blur the outline of the body. Light breaks across those fine strands. The predator's gaze slips past, failing to notice the prey hiding right beside it. In moments like these, evolution does not need to create anything grand. A very small advantage can be enough for a creature to live one more day enough to pass that trait on to the next generation. And then over time, simple coverings began to diversify. Not every feathered dinosaur looked the same. Some species had only simple filaments on part of the body. Others carried a clearer covering like a soft coat. Some forms began to develop longer feathers on the forelimbs or tail, creating distinctive lines as they moved. Imagine the ancient forest, not only with gray-brown bodies covered in scales, but also with the soft movements of feathers, gentle outlines on small bodies' tails, with trailing plumes and arms beginning to carry longer coverings. When that whole scene appears, the Jurassic becomes different. It is no longer only a world of thick skin and claws. It is also a world of filaments, warmth, color, and subtle signals lying across the surface of living bodies. This also makes the boundary between dinosaur and bird less simple. In the past, people often place these two images very far apart, dinosaurs as ancient creatures of the ground, birds as light creatures of the sky. But the more evidence is found, the more that distance narrows. Not because every dinosaur became a bird, and not because every dinosaur had feathers. The truth is more beautiful and more complex in certain branches of dinosaurs, especially those close to the origin of birds' bodies had already begun to carry traits that we would later recognize in modern birds. Feathers are one of the strongest signs of that closeness. Even so, we must avoid another trap, thinking that if something has feathers, it is already close to flying. In this chapter, the most important thing is not flight, but the time before flight. Feathered dinosaurs could run hunt-hide, keep warm display care for their young, or live in environments where feathers brought their own benefits. A feathered creature that could not fly was still an evolutionary success if its feather covering helped its body survive. Today, even flightless birds still have feathers, because feathers do many things besides lifting the body into the air. This helps us understand the past again. Before wings became wings, feathers had a life of their own. Imagine a light rainy day in the Jurassic forest. Drops fall through the canopy slide across leaves and strike the mud in small circles. A small dinosaur shelters beneath a fallen trunk. The covering on its body does not turn it into a bird, but it may help reduce the cold that seeps toward the skin. When the rain eases, the creature steps out, shakes its body lightly, and runs across the damp forest floor. The feathers cling slightly, then slowly dry in the warmth. The scene is not grand. There is no flight across a valley. But it is precisely these ordinary moments where evolution does most of its work. Perhaps elsewhere in the forest, a young animal presses close to a larger body. The soft covering helps hold warmth near the skin, making the wide and dangerous world around it feel a little less cold. Nearby, an adult turns its head, listening to movement in the leaves. When danger draws near, the whole body springs up. The forelimbs spread not to fly, but to keep balance while turning quickly. The feathers on the body and arms tremble with the movement. For one very brief moment, we see a shape both familiar and strange. Still, a dinosaur, yet already carrying upon its body something the future will use to write the story of birds. Feathers, then, are one of the most beautiful examples of how nature does not always create a tool for the final purpose we see later. A structure may begin as a coat for warmth, become a visual signal, help conceal the body's support balance, and then, in certain evolutionary branches, gradually be drawn into the story of air and lift. What first lay close against the skin could later extend along the forelimbs. What once only trembled lightly in the wind could later become a surface that caught the flow of air. But here, in the second chapter, we do not need to rush toward the sky. We only need to remain with the moment when feathers began to appear in the world. Let the frame move very slowly. From the leaf-covered ground, the camera rises toward a fallen tree trunk. On the damp bark, there are tiny claw marks. From there, the gaze slides toward a creature standing still in the shadow of leaves. It is not large, not majestic, not the familiar image of a dominant dinosaur. But that humble body gives us a very special feeling. Upon the skin, evolution is testing a new material. Not stone, not hard scales, not thick armor, but light, soft, flexible strands, almost fragile. Something that seems weak, yet may open possibilities beyond measure. As evening descends, the light passes through the forest in long bands. The great dinosaurs have moved far away, leaving water-filled footprints in the mud. The lower forest becomes quieter, but it does not sleep. A few small creatures begin to change position, searching for shelter through the night. The fine layers of feathers on their bodies catch the last light of day, appearing for a moment before sinking back into darkness. If we could stand there and watch long enough, we would understand that the history of wings did not begin with a takeoff. It began on the surface of skin, with warmth being held close, with color, with concealment, with silent signals among living creatures in an ancient forest. After the first feathers had appeared on the bodies of dinosaurs, our story begins to move into a stranger realm. This is no longer a world made only of scales, claws, and heavy bodies upon the ground. But it is not yet the world of flocks of birds crossing the sky as we know them today. We are stepping into a very uncertain, in-between place where life seems not yet to have decided whether it belongs to the earth or to the air. Imagine the ancient forest on a damp afternoon. The light has softened, slipping between the tree trunks and falling in thin streaks across the bed of ferns. In the lower layer of the forest, a small creature is moving very quickly. Its body is compact and light, its hind legs flexible, its long tail helping it balance as it changes direction. Along its body is a layer of fine feathers. On the forelimbs, longer feathers form a soft outline as the creature stretches its arms to leap over a large root. If you look at this creature with modern eyes, it may leave you confused. It does not look like a sparrow, not like an eagle, not like any familiar bird we know. There are still teeth in its jaws. There are still claws at the ends of its forelimbs. Its body still carries the shape of a small dinosaur, quick and alert. And yet at the same time, something very different is beginning to appear. When it stands on a low branch, the feathers around its body trembling faintly, its forelimbs opening slightly, its head tilting to one side as it observes the space below, we feel as though we are looking at a creature standing at the threshold of a new world. This is the important transitional zone of the story, the dinosaurs near the base of the evolutionary line that would eventually lead to birds. They were not all direct ancestors of modern birds. Many of their branches may have vanished, like small side paths, breaking away from the main road of evolution. But their bodies preserve precious clues. They show us that birds did not appear as a complete miracle, did not suddenly step out of the darkness with wings, beaks, and song. Before birds in the true sense existed, there were many half-familiar, half-strange creatures carrying pieces of bird-like form within bodies that were still deeply dinosaurian. One of the things that makes this stage so fascinating is the mixture. Evolution does not change a body by erasing everything old and writing something entirely new from the beginning. It works like water flowing over stone, slowly, patiently leaving marks little by little. In dinosaurs, close to birds, we can see smaller bodies, more flexible, necks, longer forelimbs, more complex hands, clearer feathers and forms that were becoming lighter over time. But beside all of that, they still kept ancient signs: teeth, long bony tails, sharp claws, and the gait of creatures that lived close to the ground. Picture a small creature climbing up a slanted tree trunk. Its claws grip the rough bark, Its tail extends behind it like a balancing rod. Each time it shifts its weight, the forelimbs open slightly, not like complete wings, but like two feathered arms, helping the body control its movement. Below lies the damp and dangerous forest floor. Above are thinner branches, places where it might avoid a few larger predators, find insects, or look out across its surroundings. This creature does not need to fly for climbing upward to become useful. Being just a little higher, seeing just a little farther, escaping danger just a little faster could already be an advantage. In forests like this, the ground and the sky are not separated by a clear line. Between them are branches, fallen trunks, roots, low cliffs, open gaps, leaps, slips, and controlled falls. A small creature does not have to fly like a modern bird in order to begin entering the world of air. If its body can leap farther, fall more slowly, and keep better balance after leaving the ground, then air has already become part of its life. That is why this chapter is not about creatures that had already mastered the sky, but about creatures standing at the threshold. They lived in experimentation. Each day their bodies had to solve very specific problems: how to run quickly through the tangled forest floor, how to cling to branches, how to escape predators, how to descend without injury, how to use the forelimbs and tail to keep the body from losing control. These problems did not need perfect answers. They only needed answers that were a little better from one generation to the next. Among these creatures are names that science would later mention, often, not because they were the first bird in a simple sense, but because they lived close to that boundary. Archaeopteryx is a special example. Its name is often understood as meaning near bird, and that name alone reveals the feeling its fossil gives to modern people. Imagine a small creature with feathers on its body, on its forelimbs, and even on its hind limbs, creating a shape that almost seems to have four feathered surfaces when seen from above. Not a modern bird, not a naked dinosaur, but a body form that makes us stop, look longer, and ask, where does the boundary truly lie? Archaeopteryx should not be told as a character soaring freely across the open sky. What matters more is that its form shows nature experimenting with many ways of arranging feathers and limbs. Feathers were not only on the body, they extended along the limbs, changing how the body might move through the air. When a creature like this leapt down from a low branch to the forest floor or crossed a gap between two fallen trunks, those feathers may have affected the way air wrapped around the body. We do not need to turn that moment into a full flight. It is enough to imagine a slower fall, a more stable landing, a more successful escape. Sometimes the future of the sky begins from small things like that. Archaeopteryx also belongs to this region of the story. Its name is often understood as dawn bird, a beautiful name for a creature near the early morning of the bird lineage. But here we must still tell the story with caution. Archaeopteryx is not a simple key that unlocks the entire mystery. It is one of the pieces that helps us understand that by the late Jurassic forms close to birds were more diverse than we once imagined. In ancient forests, there may have been many small, light-feathered bodies carrying different combinations of dinosaur-like and early bird-like features. Each species was a temporary answer from nature to the same question: how does one live between the ground, the branches, and the air? Then there is Geotingia, another name that makes the picture even more complex. What is interesting is not only its shape, but the way creatures like it unsettle the human desire for a clear, straight line. We often want a simple order: first dinosaurs, then birds, first no flight, then flight, first scales, then feathers. But the fossils of creatures at this boundary show that evolution is more like a branching bush than a straight road. Some branches moved close to birds and then stopped. Some branches kept ancient features, while developing very elaborate feathers. Some branches looked very bird-like in certain parts of the body, while in other parts they still carried a clearly dinosaurian form. To tell this chapter properly, we need to let the viewer feel that blur. A small creature runs across the forest floor. From a distance, its body and long tail make us think of a dinosaur. When it leaps onto a fallen trunk, the feathers opening around its forelimbs suggest a bird. When it turns its head, the small teeth remind us that this is not yet a bird like those of today. When it stands still in the last light of the day, the entire body becomes a living question. Not is it dinosaur or bird, but rather, why do we want to divide the ancient world with lines so sharp? In nature, those lines do not exist the way they do in books. There was no morning when one creature woke up and became a bird. There was no generation that suddenly abandoned the ground entirely to belong to the sky. Instead, there were small changes repeated in everyday life. A lighter body helped with faster running. A longer forelimb helped with better balance. Longer feathers helped the body stay more stable during a leap. A flexible tail helped with quicker changes in direction. These traits may not have been perfect, but they were useful enough to endure. Let the frame move to a more open patch of forest. A fallen tree lies across a small stream. Beneath it, cloudy water moves slowly through the mud. A feathered creature stands at one end of the trunk, hesitating for a moment. Behind it, there is a sound. It might be a predator. It might only be a breaking branch. But instinct does not wait for an explanation. The small body lunges forward. The two legs push hard. The forelimbs open. The tail extends behind, adjusting direction in the air. For one brief beat, the creature is no longer fully on the ground, nor does it truly belong to the sky. It is suspended between two worlds, held within a fragile moment that evolution is quietly remembering. The landing on the other side of the trunk may be clumsy. Claws scrape against the bark. The body wavers, then regains balance. But if that leap helps it escape danger, then it has already succeeded. It does not need to fly far. It does not need to fly high. It does not need perfect wings. In the ancient world, surviving one more moment could be enough for a trait to be preserved. And through millions of moments like this, the creatures at the edge of ground and sky gradually became one of the most important stories in the history of life. What makes these dinosaurs fascinating is not only their shape, but the lifestyle they may have had, a lifestyle that could have been highly flexible. They were not locked into a single environment. They may have searched for food on the ground, then climbed onto low branches. They may have run through mud, then leapt onto fallen trunks. They may have used feathers to keep warm in the morning, to display during the breeding season, and at the same time to help stabilize the body during short leaps. A trait does not necessarily have only one use. In evolution, the same structure can become many different answers depending on circumstance. So, when we look at these creatures at the threshold of flight, it is important not to turn them into failed versions of modern birds. They were not unfinished birds in some lesser sense. They were complete creatures in their own worlds. They did not live in order to prepare humans to understand birds. They did not know where the future of feathers would lead. They simply lived in the forest under the pressures of predators, climate food mates' shelter, and the limits of their bodies. Precisely because they lived fully within that environment, they accidentally carried within themselves pieces of a very distant future. Imagine night beginning to fall over the Jurassic forest. On the ground, moisture rises from the mud. The larger creatures have retreated into the darkness. The lower branches become a place of small movements, claws touching bark leaves, trembling soft bodies slipping through ferns. A feathered dinosaur lies still on a low branch, its head resting against its body, its tail curling lightly along the branch. The feathers on its body help hold warmth in the cooling air. The forelimbs fold close against the body. The claws still grip the bark. It is a very quiet image, but within that image, the ground and the sky have already begun to draw closer together. Above, the dark spaces between the canopies open like a deep vault. There is no bird song, no modern wings beating through the night, but there are small bodies learning how to live with height. There are forelimbs growing longer. There are layers of feathers becoming more complex. There are leaps that are making air part of movement. All of this is not yet enough to call it the conquest of the sky. But it is enough to say that a door has opened slightly. And, as this chapter comes to an end, hold on to that feeling, not the feeling of a glorious flight, but the feeling of a boundary slowly fading. Beneath our feet is the damp earth of the Jurassic. Above are pale openings between the trees. In between are small creatures with teeth, claws, tails, and feathers living in a world that no longer belongs entirely to the ground. They are dinosaurs at the threshold of flight bodies suspended between old and new, between the shadow of the forest and the distant invitation of the sky. From here, the story will lead us toward the traces left behind in stone-fragile fossils, small skeletons, feather impressions on slabs of rock, and discoveries that forced human beings to change the way they understood the origin of birds. There are stories that can no longer be told through sound, no more footsteps on mud, no more leaves trembling as a small creature darts through the lower forest. No more claws scraping against bark, no more quickened breath while escaping a predator, no more wind gliding over fine feathers in a Jurassic afternoon. All of it has sunk very deep beneath time. But sometimes the earth still keeps a trace. A fragment of bone, a tiny tooth, a faint outline of feathers blurred like smoke. A body that once lived, once moved, once feared, once searched for food, and then one day lay down in mud, in water, in fine sediment, so that millions of years later it would become a question resting silently inside stone. This chapter does not begin in an ancient forest, but in the stillness of fossils. Imagine the frame opening on a pale slab of stone. The surface is flat, thin, almost peaceful. There is no movement there, but if you look closely, you will see a small form lightly imprinted upon it, a curved neck, delicate bones, wings open to both sides, a long tail stretching behind and around the body, traces of feathers, like the shadow of a creature that has only just left the living world. That is the feeling Archaeopteryx gives to human beings, not merely a skeleton, but a moment held between two ages. When the first Archaeopteryx fossils became known from the Solnhofen limestone of southern Germany, they forced human beings to reconsider the entire story of birds. Before then, birds were often imagined as a separate group of creatures, light elevated above the ground, belonging to the sky. Dinosaurs, if people thought of them at all, belonged to stone mud claws and heavy bodies. But on that slab of rock, two worlds that seemed far apart suddenly met. Here was a creature with feathers and wing signs that made us think of birds. But in its mouth were teeth. On its forelimbs were still claws. Its tail was not short like that of modern birds, but a long chain of bones extending behind it like a memory of dinosaurs. Let the frame move very slowly across the stone. First comes the wing, where the feathers spread outward in a very clear shape. Those feathers are not meaningless decoration. They are the evidence that makes the fossil different. Bones can tell us about form, but feathers tell us more about the surface of the body, about what once touched the air. Then the frame glides down toward the hand. There, instead of a modern bird wing hidden inside feathers, we see the traces of clawed fingers. A forelimb that is both wing and hand. It suggests the sky, yet also reminds us of the ground tree trunks and the instinct to cling. What makes Archaeopteryx wondrous is not that it is the final answer to the origin of birds. Science no longer tells this story as a simple straight line, where one species stands at the beginning, and from it all, modern birds descend. Archaeopteryx matters because it is a window. Through that window, we see a body joining old and new pieces together. A body that still carries traces of small theropod dinosaurs, yet already possesses features that place it very close to the story of birds. It is this mixture that gives the fossil its power. Not because it removes the uncertainty, but because it shows that uncertainty itself was once real. Imagine a paleontologist bending over the stone, not seeing an animal running, but seeing the shadow of movement. Wings once opened, a tail once held balance. Small claws once gripped some surface. Teeth once bit into food. Feathers once lay across the body, catching light, holding warmth, and perhaps helping that creature interact with the air in a way the ground alone cannot fully explain. The fossil does not speak in words, but every small detail upon it forces human beings to ask, is this bird or dinosaur? And the longer we ask, the more we realize that the best answer may be this. It belongs to the transitional space between both. But the story does not stop in Germany. For a long time, Archaeopteryx stood almost alone in the public imagination as the greatest symbol of the transition from dinosaurs to birds. Then later, the rocks of China began to open another treasure chamber. From ancient sedimentary layers, scientists found many fossils of feathered dinosaurs preserved with astonishing detail. Some species retained traces of feathers around the body. Some showed long feathers on the forelimbs. Some even had feathers on the hind limbs, giving them a shape unlike any familiar bird today. These discoveries did not take away the role of Archaeopteryx. They did something more important. They placed Archaeopteryx within a much wider forest of evolutionary possibilities. Imagine those slabs of stone as ancient pages, each page retaining only a few lines. One page contains Anchiornis, small and delicate, feathered across many parts of the body, a form that evokes fragility and strangeness. Another page contains Aurornis, often mentioned as a form near the dawn of the bird lineage, though its precise position in the evolutionary tree remains something science continues to examine. Another page contains Schiotingia, helping make the boundary between early birds and bird-like dinosaurs more complex. And there are many other names, each one like a piece that does not yet fit perfectly. But when placed beside the others, the picture begins to appear. The origin of birds was not a straight road, but a dense thicket of closely related evolutionary branches. What is remarkable is that these fossils do not only tell us there were feathers. They show us that feathers appeared in many different ways across dinosaur bodies. In some places, feathers resembled a soft covering. In others, they were longer, forming broader surfaces. In some, feathers lay along the tail, the arms, even the legs. When looking at these specimens, viewers today can easily feel as if nature had been testing many designs at once. Not every design led to modern birds. Not every form became a skilled flyer. But each fossil shows one thing: before the sky belonged to birds. The ground already held many bodies, carrying signs of the sky. Let the story pause in a quiet exhibition hall. Night has fallen outside the museum. Soft lights shine upon the glass cases. Inside are slabs of stone that seem motionless, yet in truth they preserve movements that ended hundreds of millions of years ago. A child might see a small skeleton and think it is only a dead animal. But if one stands there longer, if the eye follows each bone, each feather, trace, each claw, the fossil begins to change. It is no longer a dead object. It becomes a compressed story. A forest, a lakeshore, a fall, a storm, a layer of fine mud, and a length of time so vast that no mind can fully grasp it. For a creature to become such a beautiful fossil, many things must happen at just the right moment. The body must be buried quickly enough to avoid being completely destroyed. The sediment must be fine enough to preserve tiny details. The environment must be suitable so that bones, feather impressions, and sometimes even traces of soft tissue do not immediately vanish. Then, over millions of years, mud becomes stone. Time gently presses everything into silence. Mountains rise, rock is quarried, sedimentary slabs are split apart, and one day a modern person sees on the surface of stone the trace of a creature that once lived beneath the Jurassic sun. A fossil, then, is not only bone. It is a rare meeting between life-death geology and chance. Archaeopteryx is also special because it appeared at the right moment in the history of human thought. The 19th century was a period when questions about evolution origins and the relationships between species were shaking science. A creature that was both bird-like and dinosaur-like, lying in ancient stone, became a powerful image for the idea that groups of living beings are not separated from one another by absolute walls. Even though science today has become more refined, even though the evolutionary tree has been redrawn many times, the symbolic weight of Archaeopteryx remains. It is like an ancient letter sent from the Jurassic saying that the boundaries between living forms were once far softer than human beings had imagined. But the more fossils are found, the less simple the story becomes, and the more beautiful it becomes as well. If we had only Archaeopteryx, we might be tempted to tell a neat story. This is the first bird, this is the bridge, this is the transition point. But feathered dinosaurs from China and many other places have expanded the story. They show that many species carried bird-like traits before, during, and after the time of Archaeopteryx. Some may have been closer to the bird lineage. Some belonged to sister branches. Some looked very bird-like on the outside, yet did not lie on the direct path leading to modern birds. Evolution is not a line of people walking straight ahead, but a forest with many branching paths, many dead ends, and many unexpected openings of light. At this point, the storyteller must remain careful. Not every fossil with feathers is a bird. Not every fossil with wings was certainly a skilled flyer. Not every name that sounds like ancient bird is a direct ancestor of the birds perched outside our windows today. But that very caution makes the story more trustworthy and more compelling. Scientific truth is no less wondrous when it admits what is not yet known. There are positions in the evolutionary tree that remain debated. There are fossil specimens that are reanalyzed when technology improves. There are very small details such as feather shape, shoulder structure, wrist tail, and foot anatomy that can change the way we understand an entire group of creatures. Let us return to the image of the stone slab. A fossil is not a film. It does not show us how that creature flew, how it ran, whether it perched in trees or walked on the ground, or for how long. It preserves only a final moment. But from that moment, science learns to read movement. If feathers are asymmetrical, what might that say about aerodynamics? If the breastbone is still flat, what might that say about flight muscles? If the foot claws are curved, what might that suggest about perching habits? If the legs show signs suited to the ground, the story opens in another direction. Each detail is like a word in a lost language, and the task of human beings is to piece them together without forcing them to say more than they can truly say. Modern technologies make the reading of that language deeper. Ultraviolet light can reveal traces of soft tissue that the naked eye cannot see. Computed tomography can look inside stone without destroying the specimen. Archaeopteryx specimens analyzed in recent times show that even a fossil famous for more than 160 years has still not told its entire story. This is beautiful. A small creature lying in stone since the Jurassic can still surprise science today. Though it has been named, redrawn, displayed, and mentioned in countless books, Archaeopteryx still holds hidden things within the thin layers of stone around it. So, what do the fossils of the first flyers truly tell us? First, they show that birds did not fall from the sky as a complete miracle. The body of a bird was built from pieces with deeper histories. The wishbone transformed forelimbs feathers, a small body, a flexible wrist, and many changes in the tail and feet. Second, they show that bird-like traits appeared scattered across many closely related dinosaur groups, creating a complex transitional zone. And finally, they remind us that every modern bird, no matter how small, has a history written in stone, in mud, and in bodies that have disappeared. Imagine once more, but this time, not the living forest. Imagine a human hand gently reaching near the edge of a stone slab, not touching the fossil, directly, only close enough to feel the fragility of time. On the surface of the stone is a creature that once had blood, muscles, eyes, breath, and instinct. In its own life, perhaps it never did anything great in the way human beings think of greatness. It simply lived in its world. But the death of that creature, buried under rare conditions, became one of the important pieces of evidence that helped later generations understand that the sky is not separate from the ground. The sky has its roots in small bodies that once ran beneath the Jurassic canopy. And as this chapter comes to an end, we leave the fossil hall with a very quiet feeling. The slabs of stone remain still behind glass. Archaeopteryx still opens its faint wings against limestone. Feathered dinosaurs from ancient rock layers still preserve their delicate forms in silence. But in the viewer's mind, they begin to move again. A long tail holds balance. A clawed hand opens. A layer of feathers touches the air. A small body stands between dinosaur and bird, between the ground and the sky, between what has vanished and what still flies through the world today. Those fossils do not give us every answer, but they give us enough to know that the story of the first wings is real. Not a myth, not an imagined image, but a history printed into stone by very fine lines. And from those fine lines, the next question begins to appear more clearly. If those bodies already had feathers, wings, and the first signs of the sky, then how did dinosaurs truly learn to fly? In the ancient forest of the Jurassic, the air was not empty. It slipped through the canopies of seed-bearing trees, glided over the damp leaves of ferns, curled softly around moss-covered trunks, and gathered as vapor in the light of early morning. To the enormous creatures walking across the ground, air was almost invisible. But to smaller, lighter bodies, living among roots, fallen trunks, and low branches, air was beginning to become something that could be felt. A small feathered dinosaur is moving through the lower layers of the forest. Its claws grip the wet bark. Its tail holds balance behind it. Every step must be measured because below is soft mud, beside it are dark thickets, and somewhere behind there may be the sound of a predator. Ahead between two branches, a short gap opens. Not as wide as the sky, not as high as a cliff, only a small space just enough for a creature to choose, turn back, climb down, or leap across. The body springs upward. In that moment, the ground leaves its feet. The feathered forelimbs open by instinct. The tail draws gently behind, correcting the direction of the fall. Air, once invisible, suddenly becomes a force touching the body, pressing into the feathers, slowing the fall, softening the line of movement. This creature has not yet mastered the sky. It does not fly like a modern bird, but for a few brief beats between two branches, it no longer belongs completely to the ground. Perhaps it was from small moments like this that flight first began to enter the history of life. Not as a miracle appearing fully formed, but as a quiet chain of experiments, climbing a little higher, leaping a little farther, falling a little more slowly, balancing a little better. And across millions of years, those fragile movements gradually open the path from claws to wings, from the shadow of the ancient forest to the wide sky that birds would one day rule. After slabs of stone and fossils have brought us closer to the shape of the first winged creatures, the question now becomes more alive. If dinosaurs had feathers, long forelimbs, lighter bodies, and structures that suggested wings, then how did they use those things? How did a body that once ran across the ground begin to interact with the air? How did a layer of feathers once used for warmth concealment or display gradually become a surface capable of supporting life? And most importantly, how could such ordinary movements as climbing, leaping, falling, and balancing open the way to one of the most wondrous abilities in the living world? Let us return to the ancient forest. The air is still heavy with moisture. The ground is covered in ferns, roots, fallen trunks, damp mud, and unpredictable patches of darkness. In a place like this, movement is never simple. A small creature that wants to survive must be quick-light and flexible. Every run may be blocked by a root rising from the ground. Every gap between two tree trunks may be a chance to escape or a dangerous fall. Predators do not need to wait for prey to fly. They only need the prey to be one beat slower. So before flight became a journey through the sky, perhaps wings began as a way for the body to control those brief moments between one point of grip and another. Picture a small feathered dinosaur standing on a fallen tree trunk. Behind it in the undergrowth, leaves stir faintly. The creature does not know whether it is wind or danger, but instinct does not wait for an answer. The two legs push hard. The body launches across a narrow stream. The forelimbs open not completely like the wings of a modern bird, but like two feathered surfaces, helping it balance in the air. The tail stretches behind, adjusting the direction of the fall. For one very short moment, the creature is no longer standing on the ground, but it is not truly flying either. It is passing through the space in between where air begins to become part of movement. If that leap succeeds, what matters is not how far it flew. What matters is that the body lands more safely. The feet grip the bark again. Claws scrape through the moss. The body sways slightly, then steadies. The predator behind slows. A small distance has been created. And in the ancient world, that small distance could mean the difference between life and death. Through countless moments like this, traits that help the body fall more slowly, land better, and keep balance more effectively could be preserved. Not because nature wanted to create birds, but because each small advantage had value in the present. One explanation for the origin of flight is often called the ground-up path. In this view, small dinosaurs living on the ground may have used feathered forelimbs to support themselves while running, leaping, turning, or climbing up sloped surfaces. Imagine a creature running across the forest floor. Ahead is a leaning tree trunk or a sloped mound of earth. The body rushes upward. The forelimbs flap quickly, not enough to lift the body from the ground, but perhaps enough to create extra pressure, extra balance, extra grip, like an invisible hand pushing the body close to the surface it is climbing. In this way, the creature could overcome an obstacle, escape danger, or reach a higher shelter. What is beautiful about this hypothesis is that flight did not begin as flight. It began as running better, climbing better, balancing better. Early wings did not need to carry the body into the sky immediately. They only needed to help a small body avoid tumbling over during a turn. They only needed to help the feet grip more securely on a slanted trunk. They only needed to make a leap slightly longer, a landing slightly steadier. In the tangled forest where every branch and hollow could become a path of escape, such movements were already important. A body that could use feathered forelimbs to control force and direction could be more flexible than bodies that ran only on the hind legs. But there is another way of imagining it, one just as rich in imagery, the path from the trees down. In this view, small creatures often climbed onto branches, low cliffs, or high fallen trunks, then used feathered limbs to slow themselves when jumping down, glide across gaps, or avoid a fall that struck too hard. Imagine a damp branch after rain. A feathered creature is searching for insects, its claws gripping tightly into the bark. Suddenly, there is movement behind it. There is no time to turn back. The body launches from the branch. In that moment, falling is no longer merely an accident, but a survival skill. The forelimbs open, the feathers catch the air, the tail adjusts direction, and the body tilts slightly so it does not drop straight to the forest floor. This is not yet powered flight, but it is no longer a completely helpless fall. Between falling and flying lies a wide transitional zone, turning in the air, slowing down, aiming the body toward a landing point, gliding a short distance, avoiding impact, moving from one branch to another. Today, many animals that are not birds can control themselves to some degree while falling. Lizards, flying squirrels, some snakes, even certain insects and small animals use their bodies to change direction in the air. This helps us imagine that before wings became the complete flying machines of life, air may have been learned through falls. In a forest with many layers, a short glide may be more useful than we imagine. A small creature does not need to cross a valley. It only needs to launch from one tree trunk to another. It only needs to fall away from the mouth of a predator. It only needs to reach a new feeding place without circling down to the ground. From above, the ground is full of danger. Beneath the leaf litter, there may be predators. In the shadows, jaws may be waiting. If a feathered body can turn a fall into a short glide, then the space between branches is no longer an absolute abyss. It becomes a pathway. So perhaps the true story does not lie entirely on one side. Not only from the ground up, not only from the trees down. In the real lives of small creatures, behaviors may have blended together. A body could run on the ground, climb up a trunk, leap over large roots, fall from a low branch, glide for a short distance, and then run again. The same layer of feathers on the forelimbs could help with balance while running, help stabilize the body while jumping slow. The body, while falling, serve as display when standing still, and help hold warmth when night came. Evolution often does not choose a straight path like a diagram. It uses every useful movement in the living world. Imagine a slow-motion scene. A small dinosaur is being chased across the forest floor. Its hind legs strike the mud and water splashes upward in tiny droplets. Ahead is a slanted tree trunk covered in moss. The creature rushes up the trunk, its claws digging into the damp bark. Its feathered forelimbs beat quickly, not to leave the ground entirely, but to keep the body pressed against the slope. Reaching a higher point, it leaps toward a nearby branch. This time, the forelimbs spread wider. The feathers catch the air. The tail sweeps lightly. The body does not drop straight down, but slides across the gaplands in a low shrub and disappears into the leaves. The entire sequence does not need to be called flight, but it already contains many small pieces of flight. Here we begin to understand that flight is not only a matter of having wings. Wings are only one part of the body. To fly or even to glide better, a creature needs the coordination of many things: body weight muscles, posture, reflexes, tail, shoulders, wrists, feathers, legs, and the ability to sense space. A long layer of feathers is not enough if the body is too heavy. Broad forelimbs are not enough if the creature does not know how to adjust the direction of its fall. A powerful flap is not enough if the body has no balance. So learning to fly is not only learning to use wings, it is the gradual transformation of the whole body into a system that knows how to speak with the air. Air is invisible by nature, but for creatures at the boundary of flight and gliding, air begins to take shape. When the body falls, the flow of air pushes into the feathers. When the forelimbs open, air creates resistance. When the body tilts, the direction of the fall changes. When the tail turns, the path curves. A creature does not need to understand physics in order to use physics. Instinct, reflex, and natural selection can work in place of theory. Those that fall better are injured less. Those that balance better escape more easily. Those that land more accurately have more chances to live. Little by little, air becomes a medium that can be used, not merely the empty space between two objects. Perhaps one of the most important steps was the ability to control the body after losing support. For creatures living close to the ground, falling is dangerous. But for creatures that can control a fall, falling can become movement. Picture a young animal in a nest or on a low branch. Its body is still clumsy. Its feathers are not complete. A slip sends it downward. But instead of tumbling helplessly, its forelimbs open unevenly. Its body turns, its feet point toward the ground. The landing is still awkward, but not fatal. In behaviors like this, we see a very primitive ability, not flight, but self-rescue in midair. And sometimes, before a creature learns to travel far through the air, it must learn not to be defeated by the air. From controlling a fall to gliding, the distance is not a miracle. If feathers grow longer, surfaces, broader bodies, lighter, and reflexes sharper, a fall can lengthen into a slanted path. The creature does not merely drop downward, it moves forward. 1 meter becomes 2. 2 meters becomes enough distance to cross a stream. A clumsy escape becomes a familiar way of moving. Across many generations, bodies that can remain in the air longer gain an advantage. And when flapping movements begin to enter the picture, the glide no longer depends completely on the starting height. One flap may extend the time in the air, another may adjust the direction. Gradually, gliding and wing beats are no longer separate. The first wing beats may not have been beautiful, not strong, not graceful, like the wings of modern birds. Forget the image of an eagle gliding steadily above high mountains. Think instead of a small, urgent body full of instinct, trying to keep itself from falling too quickly. The forelimbs beat downward, pushing air backward and downward. The body rises slightly, then loses balance. The tail adjusts. The feet prepare to land. A clumsy movement, but a useful one. And if it is useful, it can be repeated. If repeated, it can be refined. If refined across enough time, it can become a skill. In that moment, we should see flight not as an absolute boundary, but as a spectrum of movement. At one end are running and leaping. Next comes balancing with feathered forelimbs, then controlled falling, then short glides, then gliding assisted by wing beats, then powered flight over brief distances. And farther beyond, in later evolutionary branches, comes the ability to fly far, fly high, turn quickly, hunt in the air, migrate across oceans, and master layers of wind that Jurassic creatures could never have known. But here in our story, everything is still close to the ground. Flight is not yet a kingdom. Flight is still a skill being practiced in the forest. One very vivid example of this experimentation is found in feathered dinosaurs, with feathers on both the forelimbs and hind limbs, such as Microraptor, even though it lived later than the earliest stage of our story. Imagine a small creature about the size of a crow, with long feathers, not only on its arms, but also on its legs, as though the body had extra surfaces to catch the air. That shape may seem strange compared with modern birds, but that very strangeness shows that nature once tried many different ways. Some designs helped with gliding, some helped slow a fall. Some may not have led directly to birds today, yet still show us that air had become a vast evolutionary playground. Microraptor was not necessarily a direct ancestor of modern birds, but it is a powerful image of a stage when many feathered dinosaur branches were experimenting with the sky. Still, we should not imagine evolution as a sequence of lessons with a clear goal. There was no flight school in the ancient forest. No creature practiced because one day its descendants would become birds. Every behavior began from immediate needs, escaping, finding food, keeping balance, finding a mate, finding a place to sleep, protecting young bodies, avoiding a deadly fall. These simple needs pushed bodies into new situations. And in those situations, feathers, which may at first have been only a soft covering, gradually became a more complex tool. Let the scene move into a late afternoon. The sun lowers behind the tree trunks, making the forest floor glow in scattered patches. A small creature stands on a branch, looking down at the ground below. There is no grand music, no legendary takeoff, only a very quick decision. It jumps. The forelimbs open. Feathers tremble. The body tilts slightly, not falling straight down, but sliding through the air along a soft curve. The tail makes one final correction. The feet touch a lower branch. The whole body sways, then steadies. The creature pauses for one breath, its eyes bright in the shade. Then it continues moving as if what just happened were only an ordinary part of life. But to us looking back from hundreds of millions of years later, that moment carries a deeper meaning. Because within that short leap lies the seed of flight. Not flight in its complete sense, not wings that have conquered gravity, but an early negotiation with gravity. The body no longer surrenders completely to the fall. Air is no longer only emptiness. Feathers are no longer only a coat. The forelimbs are no longer merely appendages of a body running on land. everything begins to take part in a new kind of movement. Perhaps that is how dinosaurs learned to fly, not through a single leap, but through millions of moments of almost falling, almost tumbling, almost being caught, almost hitting the ground too hard. Each time, the bodies that controlled themselves better gained another chance. Each chance to survive opened a path for the next generation. Over time, very small differences accumulated into great change. Feathers became longer, wings became broader, muscles coordinated better, wrists became more flexible, bodies became lighter, reflexes became faster. And then, at some point, a creature could not only fall more slowly, not only glide from a branch to the ground, but beat its wings strongly enough to pull itself farther through the air. When night begins to fall over the ancient forest, those movements grow still. In the lower layers of the trees, small creatures search for shelter. Above, the dark spaces between branches deepen. A feathered dinosaur curls itself on a low branch, its forelimbs folded close to its body, its feathers holding the last warmth of the day. No one calls it a pioneer. No one knows that the clumsy movements of bodies like its own will one day lead to a future where the sky is filled with the sound of beating wings. But in that night, the story has taken one more step. From feathers from fossils, from bodies at the threshold, we have now seen air begin to enter the life of dinosaurs. After the first leaps between branch and ground, after the slower falls, the shorter glides, and the more awkward wing beats, the story of wings did not come to an end. Flight was not the final destination the moment a body first left the ground. It was only a doorway opening. When the earliest bird-like creatures began to use feathers, forelimbs, and their bodies to speak with the air, a new journey continued. From this point on, their bodies had to change more deeply. Not only to fall more slowly, not only to glide across a gap, but to live longer and longer in a world where the sky was beginning to become a road. Imagine a morning in another forest later in time. There is still vapor in the air, still damp ground, still ferns and ancient canopies. But in the higher layers, there is now more movement. Small feathered creatures no longer only run along the ground. They appear on branches. They pass across gaps. They land along the edge of a lake, then spring upward again when a sound stirs nearby. Each movement no longer feels like an accident, rescued at the last possible moment. Some bodies have begun to control the air better. In certain branches, tails have become shorter, wings are clearer, bones are lighter. And the sky, though not yet entirely belonging to modern birds, no longer feels as unfamiliar as before. In the previous chapters, we have seen bodies standing at the boundary, carrying teeth claws and long tails, while also bearing feathers and wings. But after that stage, evolution did not follow a neat straight line. It opened many directions at once. Some branches kept their teeth but flew better. Some began to develop beaks while still retaining claws on the wings. Some shortened the tail, transforming the end of the spine into a more compact structure to support the tail feathers. Some lived in trees. Some stayed close to water. Some were as small as sparrows. Others were larger, stronger, and adapted to different environments. The world of ancient birds was not a simple sketch of the birds we know today. It was an evolutionary forest of its own, filled with forms that once succeeded, then disappeared. One of the most important changes lay in the tail. In Archaeopteryx, the tail was still long made of many bony vertebrae, extending behind the body like a very clear trace of dinosaurs. That tail could help with balance, but for more efficient flight, a long bony tail also had its limits. In many later birds, the tail became shorter, and the final vertebrae fused into a structure called the pygostyle, where tail feathers could attach and fan outward. With that arrangement, the tail was no longer a long, bony rod trailing behind the body, but a more compact, more flexible part that could help control flight direction, slow the body down, and maintain balance during landing. The discovery of Bambinornis shows that this short-tailed form appeared very early, as far back as the late Jurassic, making the story, after the first wings, far more complex than the older image of a world in which Archaeopteryx stood almost alone. Picture that difference in a very slow scene. A long-tailed creature leaps down from a branch, its tail stretching behind like a straight line, helping with balance, but also adding more mass to the body. Then the frame shifts to another ancient bird, one with a shorter tail, its tail feathers fanning out like a small fan. When that creature tilts its body in the air, the tail does not merely follow the movement. It helps adjust it. A slight opening, a slight closing, a small change in angle, a softer landing. Changes like these may not feel spectacular when seen step by step, but across millions of years, they made the body increasingly suited to the air. Wings continued to change as well. Forelimbs that had once still looked very much like dinosaur arms gradually became more specialized flying surfaces in certain branches. Flight feathers grew longer, arranged themselves more clearly, and created more efficient shapes as air passed across them. Shoulders, wrists, wing bones, and muscles began to coordinate more effectively. Wing beats were no longer only frantic motions to avoid falling, but could gradually create more stable lift and thrust. Yet this process did not unfold in the same way across every species. Some retained many ancient features. Some advanced further in one part of the body while remaining primitive in another. The body of an ancient bird was like a piece of music being rewritten one passage at a time, where new melodies and old rhythms still sounded together. This is called mosaic evolution, but we can understand it in a more familiar way. The body does not renew itself entirely all at once. A creature may have a fairly modern tail, while its hands still have claws. One species may have developed flight feathers while still keeping teeth in its jaws. Another may have a beak, while its flight-style shoulders or legs remain very different from those of modern birds. Evolution is not like replacing an old outfit with a new one in a single day. It is more like repairing a house while people are still living inside it. Each part is adjusted when necessary, while other parts continue working in older ways. As time moved into the Cretaceous period, the story of ancient birds became richer. Forests, lakes, and river-edge landscapes began to contain more forms of birds. Some lived near water, where insects, small fish, and aquatic creatures provided abundant food. Some may have lived in trees, gripping branches with their feet and claws. Some had beaks, while others still had teeth. Some had short tails, while others retained very ancient traits. If we could stand in a morning of the Cretaceous, perhaps we would not hear birdsong like we hear today, but we would see more familiar movements, a small body landing on a branch, a pair of wings folding closed, a head turning quickly, a shadow gliding across the surface of a lake. The fossils of the Jehol biota in northeastern China help us imagine this stage more clearly. The rock layers there preserved many ancient organisms, including feathered dinosaurs, early birds, plants, fish, insects, and small mammals. For ancient birds, Jehol is like a window opening onto the dawn of diversity. Not just one species, not just one body plan, but an entire community of winged creatures testing different ways of life. These discoveries from Cretaceous sediments greatly enriched scientific understanding of the first major radiation of birds. Imagine an ancient lake in the Jehol region. In the morning, the lake surface lies flat like a slightly misted mirror. Volcanic ash from distant regions may once have fallen here at different moments, helping bury and preserve organisms with astonishing delicacy. Along the shore, plants grow close to the water. Insects fly low. An ancient bird lands on a branch, its claws gripping the bark. Its body is feathered, its wings folded, its tail much shorter than in earlier forms. On another branch, a different kind of bird still has teeth in its jaws, its eyes watching the water. They are not exactly alike. Each species is its own experiment in how to live with wings. One important image from this stage is Confuciusornis, a famous ancient bird from the early Cretaceous of China. Unlike Archaeopteryx, Confuciusornis had a toothless beak, a feature that makes it look closer to modern birds at first glance. But that does not mean it was a modern bird or a direct ancestor of the birds alive today. Its body still retained many ancient traits, and its story belonged to a separate branch. What is interesting is that the appearance of a beak shows another direction of change, not only the wings and tail, but also the head jaws feeding habits and ways of interacting with food were being tested by evolution. In the world of ancient birds, the beak did not arrive as a single fixed pattern. Teeth could disappear in one branch while remaining in another, and so the history of birds was anything but simple. From a distance, a Confuciusornis might appear very delicate, a small body, clearly feathered wings, a pointed beak, and in some individuals, a tail that may have carried long feathers. It perched on branches or moved near lakes, becoming part of the Cretaceous landscape. But if we look closely with scientific eyes, we can still see the mixture. Every modern-looking feature stands beside an ancient one. Every trait that resembles birds today appears alongside a trace of the dinosaur world. And it is precisely this mixture that makes ancient birds so fascinating. They were not small copies of modern birds placed mistakenly into the past. They were creatures of their own time, at once familiar and strange, close to us, and yet impossible to truly touch. Alongside forms such as Confuciusornis, the Cretaceous also witnessed the appearance and diversification of larger bird groups. One of these was Enantiornithes, often called the opposite birds because their shoulder structure differed in a distinctive way from that of modern birds. This was one of the most successful groups of birds in the Cretaceous. They lived in many environments. Many species were capable of life in trees, and in the Mesozoic fossil record, they made up a large portion of known bird diversity. But although they were once very widespread, they were not the group that led directly to all modern birds. In the end, they too disappeared at the close of the Cretaceous. Let us pause on this idea for a moment because it is very important for the flow of the story. Success in one age does not guarantee survival forever. Enantiornithes may have perched on branches, flown through forests, searched for food, reproduced, and filled the ancient sky with shapes that looked very much like birds. But that was a sky that no longer exists. Those wings once truly lived, truly opened in the light of the Cretaceous, but they did not continue into the later world. When we look at modern birds, we are seeing a surviving branch, but beside that branch, there were once many other relatives, many other paths, and many other fates that ended in stone. Another group, Ornithuromorpha, is important because it is the broad branch that includes modern birds and their closer relatives, excluding Enantiornithes. Cretaceous discoveries show that this group appeared early and began diversifying alongside many other bird forms. Archaeornithura mimani, described from rock layers around 130.7 million years old, is one of the important specimens for understanding the early history of Ornithuromorpha. This shows that when the Cretaceous was still in its early stages, the bird world already contained many major branches existing side by side rather than a single line, waiting until the end to flourish. In a storytelling scene, we might imagine two parallel paths within the same ancient forest. On one branch, a small enantiornithine grips tightly with its feet, its wings folded, its body adapted to life among the canopy. Near the lake, an early ornithuromorph moves across the mud or along the water's edge, its body carrying different traits that may have opened directions of life closer to the birds of later times. They did not know they belonged to the groups that humans would name hundreds of millions of years afterward. They were simply winged creatures sharing the same world, searching for food, avoiding predators, living beneath the shadows of great dinosaurs and the slow changes of the planet. The evolution after the first wings then was not only a matter of flying better, it was the story of ancient birds learning to become many different kinds of creatures. Some adapted to trees, some stayed near water, some had beaks, some had teeth, some had feet better suited for gripping, some had wings better suited to different kinds of flight. Feathers were not only flying surfaces, they also retained warmth, created color, covered the body, and may have helped with display or recognition. The bird body gradually became a refined combination of living on land, in trees, on the water, and in the air. The sky was no longer the only destination. It became one part of many ways of life. Imagine a quiet afternoon in the Cretaceous. On a slender branch, an ancient bird lowers its head to preen its feathers. There is something deeply familiar in that motion. It uses its beak or jaws to tend each feather, keeping the wing surface from becoming tangled, dirty, or disordered. For a creature with wings, feathers are no longer merely a covering. Feathers are a condition of life. A damaged feather can make flight less stable. An uneven wing surface can make landing more difficult. In that small behavior, we see a profound change. A winged body must not only fly, but must care for the very ability to fly. On the ground below, non-flying dinosaurs continued to live. Some were enormous, some small, some predators, some plant eaters. Ancient birds did not immediately replace that world. They lived within it. The sky did not erase the ground. Wings did not make claws disappear overnight. Instead, early birds found their own ecological openings: branches, lake edges, forest layers, short spaces between tree trunks, water margins where insects rose at dusk. The evolution of birds is the story of finding new niches on a planet already filled with other creatures. What is worth remembering is that many traits we think of as very bird-like appeared piece by piece again and again, sometimes independently in different branches. A beak might appear in one group, while teeth remained in another. A short tail could develop early in some forms, but not in all. Flight ability was not uniform either. Some species may have flown better, some more weakly, some may have lived mainly in trees, while others may have depended more on running, climbing, or gliding. When we look at the fossils, what appears is not a simple ladder, rising from low to high, but a map with many paths, many experiments, and many different outcomes. And it is precisely this diversity that makes the period after the first wings so beautiful. It shows that evolution did not stop after achieving a major invention. Once wings appeared and began to be useful, the next question was not only can it fly or not. The question became what kind of flight, where to live, what to eat, how to perch, how to care for feathers, how to escape danger, in what environment to reproduce, how to keep balance when landing on a slender branch or soft mud. Each question pulled the body in a different direction. Each direction created a new form. When twilight falls over the ancient lake, Small, ancient birds move through the last layer of light. One shadow perches on a branch. Another glides across the water. Another disappears among the leaves. They do not know that one day many of their branches will go extinct. They do not know that only a very small part of the ancient bird picture will lead to the world of modern birds. But in that moment, they are living within their own abundance. The Cretaceous sky is no longer only the realm of flying reptiles. It has begun to contain feathered bodies, small wings, short flight paths, and soft movements among the trees. And, as this chapter comes to an end, hold on to that image. After the first wings, life did not fly straight toward the form of modern birds. It spread outward. It experimented. It revised. It kept teeth in one place, created beaks in another, shortened the tail in one branch, preserved claws in another, made wings more efficient, made feet more suitable, made bodies lighter, more flexible, and more diverse. Ancient birds continued to evolve, not like a straight river, but like a widening delta, with many small streams flowing toward different fates. Something very strange happens when we look at a small bird perched on a rooftop in the morning. That body is so familiar, so ordinary, that we can easily pass by without thinking anything more of it. A small head tilts to one side. Two slender feet cling to the edge of a wall. Its feathers puff slightly in the wind. Then, with only the gentlest movement, the wings open, the air catches the body, and the creature flies past our eyes, as if it were simply a natural part of everyday life. But if we could look more deeply into that moment, we would see a history so long it becomes overwhelming. In that tiny beat of wings, there are shadows of forests from 160 million years ago. There is the dampness of the Jurassic. There are seed-bearing trees, layers of ferns, feathered creatures standing between the ground and the branches. There is Archaeopteryx imprinted in limestone. There are small dinosaurs that once fell, leapt, glided, and opened feathered forelimbs to save themselves from landing too hard. And there is a truth, both simple and wondrous. Birds are not merely distant descendants of dinosaurs. According to our current understanding of evolution, birds are a living branch of dinosaurs. That truth can make the present world feel different, because dinosaurs in many people's imagination usually belong to a lost past. They lie in museums, in stone, in illustrations, in ancient valleys that no longer exist. We think of them as creatures that disappeared completely after a tremendous catastrophe. But the truth is more subtle. The giant dinosaurs no longer cross the plains. The great predators no longer leave footprints in the mud. The long-necked species no longer lift their heads among the trees. Yet one small light-feathered winged branch passed through the narrow doorway of time and continued to exist in a form we now call birds. Imagine the Earth at the end of the Cretaceous period, about 66 million years ago. By then, the sky no longer resembled the empty sky of the Jurassic. Ancient birds had become more diverse. Some lived in trees. Some stayed near water. Some had beaks. Some still had teeth. Some belonged to groups that were once highly successful, yet did not continue into the world we know today. Below them, non-flying dinosaurs still dominated many landscapes. The planet was alive with immense richness, where different evolutionary branches existed side by side, unaware that a colossal event was approaching. Then disaster came. An impact from outer space combined with severe environmental changes shook the entire ecosystem. The sky darkened, food chains broke apart, forests burned, the climate shifted, light diminished, and many once stable living worlds suddenly became impossible to continue. the non-avian dinosaurs disappeared. Many marine reptiles had already vanished earlier, and many other groups of organisms also suffered heavily. Even ancient birds did not escape loss. Many bird branches that had once flown through the Cretaceous went extinct. Wings that had once opened in the ancient sky closed forever inside stone. But not everything disappeared. Some bird lineages survived. Perhaps because of their small size. Perhaps because of a more varied diet. Perhaps because of their habitats, behaviors, seeds, water lake shores, or small refuges that larger creatures could no longer use. They did not survive because they were the strongest in any simple sense. They survived because they were better suited to a world that had just been broken. And from those surviving branches, after the dark dust slowly settled, after forests began to recover, after ecological spaces opened, again birds continued spreading across the planet. From here, the dinosaur legacy entered a new chapter. It was no longer the age of gigantic bodies ruling the ground. No longer the Jurassic forests, where feathers had only just begun to change the fate of certain small groups. Now winged descendants began entering almost every environment imaginable. Some species flew across oceans. Some lived deep in forests. Some ran across the ground. Some dived into water. Some hunted from above. Some were small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Some were large enough that their wings opened like sails. All of them are very different, yet within their bodies remain traces of a shared history. Look at an eagle gliding over the mountains. Its broad wings are open almost without needing to flap, adjusting only slightly as it rides the warm air rising from the rocky slopes. There we see the perfection of the air. But deep within the light skeleton, within the structure of forelimbs, transformed into wings, within the clawed feet, within the posture of the body, there are still lines leading back to a dinosaur past. Look at an ostrich running across the savanna, unable to fly, but still a bird. Strong legs, a large body, astonishing speed. Their flight has been lost, but the dinosaur legacy has not disappeared. It only appears through another path ground speed endurance and a feathered body that no longer needs the sky. Then look at a small sparrow perched near a window. Not majestic like an eagle, not strange like an ostrich, just a small familiar creature that may appear on a power line, in a yard, on a tiled roof, or beside a road. But that very ordinariness makes the legacy even deeper. Because if dinosaurs survived only in grand images, we would think they belonged to museums. But when a sparrow hops lightly across the ground, turns its head very quickly, preens its feathers, then rises from a low branch, we are seeing the past enter everyday life. The Jurassic is not as far away as we imagine. A part of it still wakes each morning with the birdsong outside the door. What makes this story beautiful is not only survival, but the way that survival transformed into countless forms. Hummingbirds beat their wings so quickly that their bodies seem to hang in the air before a flower. Penguins do not fly through the sky, but use their wings like paddles to fly through cold water. Owls turn feathers into instruments of silence, gliding through the night with almost no sound. Albatrosses cross vast stretches of ocean, letting the wind carry their bodies for hundreds, even thousands of kilometers. Each species is a different answer to the same original legacy. A body with feathers, with wings, and with deep origins in small dinosaurs that once lived beneath the shadows of ancient forests. If we return to the beginning of the journey, we can see that everything is connected by a very fine thread. 160 million years ago, in the damp forests of the Jurassic, feathers did not necessarily arise for flight. They may have retained warmth, offered protection, created signals, and helped bodies survive in humble ways. Then there were creatures standing between the ground and the branches, running, climbing, leaping, and falling more slowly. There were fossils that preserved traces of feathers and bone, showing human beings that the boundary between dinosaur and bird was once not as rigid as we imagined. There were imperfect first wings, short glides, awkward wing beats. And after all of that, one branch survived long enough for today's sky to still contain the sound of wings. Modern birds, then, are not only symbols of freedom, they are also symbols of memory. Not memory in the conscious sense, the way humans recall an old story, but memory held within the shape of the body. Bones remember in the way bones can. Feathers remember in the way feathers can. Wings remember in the way movement can. Every time a bird opens its wings, a very long history is silently reenacted, from skin to feathers, from forelimbs to wings, from leap to flight, from small dinosaur to a creature gliding through the modern sky. Perhaps that is why when we look at birds, we often feel a lightness that is difficult to explain. They appear in the most ordinary moments, on a tree branch, at dawn, by a lake at sunset, on a power line, in a crowded city in the sky after rain. They do not need to carry an ancient appearance to remind us of the past. Their very aliveness is already the reminder. A bird is not a fossil, but it is a living fossil in a broad and poetic sense, not because it has remained unchanged, but because it carries within itself the story of changes that once took place. Still, this must be said carefully. The birds of today are not tiny copies of Archaeopteryx. They are not Jurassic dinosaurs preserved unchanged and placed into the modern world. Across tens of millions of years, birds have changed greatly. Beaks, wings, respiratory systems, feathers, bones, behaviors, ways of flying, ways of reproducing, and ways of living in different environments have all evolved in many directions. Yet, their origin still connects back to a branch of feathered theropod dinosaurs. In other words, legacy does not mean standing still. Legacy is a current one that can change shape, expand, lose certain parts, gain others, and still keep a deep connection to where it began. Imagine one final shot for this journey. A modern morning. The sun rises behind rooftops, behind rows of trees, behind streets, still quiet. A small bird perches on a branch. It preens its feathers for a few seconds, then lifts its head and looks around. There is no Jurassic forest before us, no long-necked dinosaurs passing by, no ancient lake preserving bodies in sediment. There is only a soft wind and the light of today. But when the wings open, the outline of the past appears in that very quick movement. A push from the feet, a beat of the wings. The air lifts the small body, and the creature flies across the sky carrying with it a story longer than every human civilization. Somewhere a child looks up and sees only a bird. A scientist looks up and sees a surviving branch of dinosaurs. A person tired after a long day looks up and simply feels their heart grow quiet. All three ways of seeing can be true. Because birds belong to the present, but they also belong to antiquity. They are creatures of gardens, rooftops, riversides, and cities, while also being the result of a journey that began very deep in time. They do not need to be covered in myth to become wondrous. Their truth is already wondrous enough. And when we think back across the entire story, from the forests of 160 million years ago to the sky today, perhaps the most important thing to remember is not a single name, not one fossil, and not the question of which species was the first bird. What matters most is the transition. A world where scales and feathers were no longer absolutely separate. A body that had both claws and wings. A long tail slowly giving way to a shorter one. A fall gradually becoming a glide. An awkward wing beat slowly becoming flight. A small dinosaur branch gradually becoming thousands of bird species across the planet. The dinosaur legacy does not live only in museums, in skeletons mounted high beneath glass roofs, or in stone slabs carefully protected by paleontologists. That legacy is also out there very near, in birdsong at dawn, in a feather fallen on the road, in a wing shadow passing over the surface of a lake, in a flock of birds becoming a dark streak across the evening sky. Each of these images is small, but if we look with an imagination that has traveled through this journey, they become much larger. They are the continuation of a story that Earth began writing long before humans existed. Perhaps dinosaurs did not completely disappear in the way we once thought as children. The great bodies are gone. The roars, if they ever sounded, have faded. The giant footprints remain only in stone. But one part of that world learned to become lighter, learned to wear feathers, learned to use the air as a road, learned to survive the end of an age. And in the end, that part is still here, flying through the morning, perching on branches, singing in modern forests, and reminding us that life does not always win through the greatest strength, but through the deepest capacity to change. So, the next time you see a bird fly past your window, pause for just 1 second. Do not only see a small creature passing by. Imagine behind those wings the damp Jurassic forests, the feathered dinosaurs running among ferns, Archaeopteryx lying still in limestone, the short leaps between branches, the ancient bird lineages that once flew and vanished, a colossal extinction and a fragile survival. None of these things are far away. They are gathered into a movement so light it almost makes no sound. And this is where our journey slowly comes to a close. From a world without birdsong, we have arrived in a world where birds are everywhere. From feathers that may once have existed only to keep warmth, we have reached wings that cross oceans. From small creatures not yet fully separated from the ground, we have reached a sky filled with life. This story is not the story of a sudden miracle. It is the story of time of experiment, of loss of survival, and of a legacy still moving around us every day. And here our journey through the world of 160 million years ago slowly comes to a close. We have passed through ancient forests where light filtered through unfamiliar canopies, where the ground was covered in ferns, where small feathered dinosaurs ran through the shadows without ever knowing that their bodies were carrying a future far greater than themselves. We have seen feathers before they became symbols of the sky. We have stood before fragile fossils such as Archaeopteryx, Anchiornis, and Microraptor, and realized that flight did not appear in a single magical moment, but was built through millions of years of experimentation, failure, adaptation, and transformation. Perhaps the next time you see a small bird perched on a power line, a wing gliding over a rooftop, or a flock of birds crossing the evening sky, you will sense something more ancient within that gentle movement. Not only a creature of the present, but an echo of the Jurassic, a living trace of a dinosaur branch that did not vanish completely but continues to fly through our world every day. If you have listened all the way to these final moments, thank you so much for staying with this story. If you enjoy journeys through natural history, ancient mythology, lost civilizations, or the mysteries of Earth before humans ever appeared, please subscribe to the channel and follow the fan page so you do not miss the next stories. And before you go, let me know. After this story of the first wings, what would you like to hear next? Megalodon beneath the ancient oceans, the rise of mammals after the dinosaurs, or another secret still sleeping in stone in the earth and in the very deep memory of this planet.